Hi guys, Christy here with Just Saying. Today we're going to make this card, and I apologize this video is late. It should have been filmed and uploaded last Monday, so I'm exactly a week behind because I tried not to let this card kick my butt. This card is inspired by Google searches, and I can't remember the Stampin' Up! Demonstrator that I got the idea for this one from. This card uses the stamp set Country Home. I'm using the bucket and the flowers with the cotton for those two. The buffalo check is the background image, and I'm using the ceiling tiles embossing folder. I'm hoping there's not too much glare on that to get the copper ceiling tile here. Now, I've done a lot of prep work for this card because it is slightly video intensive. So to kind of go over some basics, there's Early Espresso as the card base. Then I've got Pool Party as both the ceiling tile background, a pool party that's been buffalo checked, and Pool Party stamped with Early Espresso to get the tin that I've then cut out, and I'll show you that coloring technique in just a second. So I'm going to get started. When I did the ceiling tile, I used a layer of 5 1/4 by 4 Pool Party, and I used my embossing buddy here, and it seems redundant that we're going to be putting this into a folder and then powder on top of it and a lot of touching, but I didn't want the powder everywhere. So when I did this, I used my VersaMarked on the Stampin' Up! Side of the embossing folder, put the cardstock on the area that I've not VersaMarked and lined it up how I wanted it, and you can do it both directions. I don't think it really mattered which way I went. And then I closed it up and made a sandwich through the die cutting machine. And for that I used a Big Shot, and I used the multi-purpose platform with both tabs closed. Then the embossing folder, cardstock, and one layer on top to make my sandwich. This wasn't too tight, it wasn't too loose, it didn't cut the cardstock, so it was absolutely perfect in my opinion. So then now I've got a very hard to see layer of VersaMarked, and I sprinkled the copper embossing powder from Stampin' Up. Heat set that, and then let it cool a little bit so that I could take a scrap of paper. I've got so many pads of yellow paper, and any sponge will work. A brayer will work. Stampin' Up! Round sponges that you can cut into pie shape, or finger daubers, whatever your preference is. Using Early Espresso, just ink up a little bit, and I'm just putting this over the Pool Party. Trying to take out some of the blue so that that's more of a patina instead of the color. And the ink will stay on top of the embossing powder, so you're going to get some brown fingers. Okay, so it just dulls it a little bit, but it's a complete transformation from what it started with. Next to that, I did the buffalo check pattern. And when I do a big stamp like this one, I like to use the stamp on a surface. And I'm going to go straight to my desktop. And then ink it up. And I ink up the whole thing because I don't know where I'm going to end up with the cardstock. Trying to get an even layer, although some of this is going to be covered. taking this, which is 4 1/4 by 3. I'm going to try to line it up before I place it with the squares. And again, my sheet of paper, and just rub, being careful to hold the cardstock the whole time, and peeling it back. Now, it doesn't matter to me how dark or light that check is. It is a background image, and this one obviously was inked less than the original that I did. So that's going to be set aside. Now up is the can and the coloring technique that I did for that. So I used the Stampin' blends, and I used dark and light smoky slate, dark Pool Party, light Old Olive, and dark Pumpkin Pie for this part. And some people have issues with blends. I think you have to remember a few things. You can stay in the lines as much as you want, but this type of marker, because it's alcohol based, will absorb into the cardstock and bleed through the lines a little bit. These two I just did earlier, neither one of them did I go out of the lines, but holy doodle did I go out of the lines. It's okay, because we're going to cut it out. So I know I've got two stamped images here that are colored, but I want to show you my technique. I started with the dark one and on the thick tip, and I used the lines of the can to add the dark spots that I think should be there. Just adding in some color. Oops. And then using the light one with the thick tip, blending that dark harsh line out of the way and adding more color to blend it around the can. Now I'm staying away from the middle because I'm going into the middle with the blue and green. Thick tip again on the dark Pool Party, and I'm just going to pull some of this gray down and into the middle using circular strokes and adding. And I did forget to do here the handles. Fairly quickly when you're working with these so that the alcohol stays wet and you can blend it in. And then straight down with the Pool Party, or Old Olive, back in with Pool Party to move around the green a little bit into the gray. Now I'm going to add a little bit more light smoky slate here on the left side, because this is my dark side in my mind. Okay, so the green I think is good. It's taking over some of the blue. I'm going to try to add some of that back in just to lighten up the green, blend it out a bit. And then I want to add rust, and I hope that you can see that in my images. So I went around the handle, around the weld points of the jar, and you can use the thick or the thin tip depending on how much you want to lay down or how much your hands aren't shaking when you're doing this. And where would you think that rust would go? So even if you kind of go down into the body of the bucket, jar, milk jug. Okay, then light smoky slate again, and I'm going to pull out the orange, the pumpkin pie, and make its lines a little less harsh. And let this sit, because the colors will blend and they will soften up a little bit. And all three of mine are fairly, this one I cut out, no, this one I did last week with just the two grays, and I added in the Pool Party Old Olive and orange today just to play with it, and it was still able to pull and blend the colors. So I don't like this bit here. Let it sit while you assemble the card. So I've got all the pieces. Oh, one tip that I'm going to show you. In the bit of this container, there is this space, I don't know which one you can see it better on, right in here where the jar has its handle that shouldn't be colored in, but the color bled through. So I'm just coloring it in with Stampin' Write marker in Basic Black. Okay, so my coloring is done, but I'm going to let this one that I just did sit so that the colors meld a little bit, and I'll come back to that. This is my cutout image, and that's what I would do with these next two, is cut them out, and I do need my marker. The outside edges, it's very hard to see, and maybe your cutting's not perfect, but maybe you've got some angles that don't show perfectly. Let's see if we can go into the light here. And maybe if I did it on blue, no. I'm going to do it on this inset color of white. You can't really see it on camera, and I apologize. I know what I'm trying to explain, but it's where your cutting doesn't follow the lines perfectly, or it's slightly jagged. And to the untrained eye, your gift receiver will probably appreciate it regardless, but finishing this card by just going around the edge with a dark or coordinating marker will finish off the pool party that you can see, and it redefines the edge of the stamp that's kind of hidden by the coloring of the image. I don't know how else to describe it, but it just finishes off a fussy cut item. And I will say go slow, because the last thing, and I've done this, is you go in and you wreck the item by coloring it too much, or your hand slips. But use the angles of the brush on the side of the brush to color in the edges. And then you can, I slipped on that side, but look at how much the markers bleed through. Okay, so I think I've colored all my edges. I'm going to stop here in a second before my hand slips. And we're at the assembly point. This card is assembled with both dimensionals and snail adhesive. So I'm going to get my card base, and it's Early Espresso as the base. And I've got Whisper White as the inset, so I'll adhere that. And I do mine so that they have the same matting border as the front, or the same, follows the same process. Now, the copper ceiling tile, it can go down with snail, tear and tape, something that's got a strong adhesive. I went with Tombow Multi-Purpose so that I can, because it even wants to bend, and I can just smear the glue around. And then I've got some fine tuning time of when I put the cardstock on the base. And with all these bumps and grooves, I want to make sure I've got some pretty good coverage. I usually make sure that I've got 3 sides squared up, and then I know my 4th will work. I'm just going to hold that there in place for a second. Now, how did I do the next one? Dimensionals are underneath the buffalo check, but then because I've got the Whisper White also on top of that, I'm going to show you what I've done to make that the same level on all of the layers. So my buffalo check is over here. Oh, I haven't shown you my coloring. Okay, buffalo check. Let's one thing at a time, Christy. Dimensionals. All 4 corners. I like to do the middles of the corners. the middles of the corners. The middles also, just to provide some even layers. That one's done. Just a couple more here. If you've watched any of my videos before, I have a trick of using a thumbnail usually to stick in the dimensional, and it kind of helps lift the corners and making it easier to peel. Also, if you watched, I don't always remove these middle or the middle dimensional backing. This one I will because of the texture on the ceiling tile. Okay, good. And then this one, like I said, is 4 1/4 by 3, so it's got a fairly big mat around it showcasing that copper tile. Okay, now the cotton flower, I have them stamped. So they are a photopolymer stamp, and that allowed me to be able to stamp right down at the edge of the stitched die. I don't remember, stitch layering dies, because some of that's going to be hidden underneath my jug, bucket, milk, churn. Okay, so light smoky slate. I'm giving some dimension to the cotton, and just causing a shadow around where the stems meet the brown bits. And this also is stamped in Early Espresso to give that natural, what would have cotton balls in that brown color, or yeah, in that brown color with the shadow. And then, oh, I did this random combination to for the center flower. I used the same color as before, pumpkin pie dark, just a little bit in the center, and then carefully with light cherry cobbler, I blended out that orange. I don't know why, but I felt like it needed it, because there's other flowers that are going to have red, and I wanted them to have a different color. So this is going to be using the Stampin' Write markers in Cherry Cobbler, and I'm going to fill in, I think I can do it here with the thick tip, carefully just filling in these circles. Not quite sure what they are, but they're Cherry Cobbler now. I more than likely have missed one. And using dark and light old olive, I'm going to color in some of these leaves. Now, I know that my old olive has been, let's just say, destroyed at the tip. Somebody has used it and gone the wrong way and broken the end of the marker, but I can still use it. You just have to be super aware of what I'm doing. This one's even worse. So I think it's probably me trying to put the lid back on that's done it. Let's go in and fill in some dark, and then I'll blend the dark out with the light in just a second. And with the light in the fine tip, pull some of that greens around. And, Early Espresso, I didn't have a blends or a marker that would work, so I'm just going to squeeze the case, this is the old style, and open it. Now I've loaded some of the ink color from the pad onto the top here for the palette using a blender pen. I make sure that it's clean always by just rubbing it on some paper and picking up some color here. Now it's going to be quite dark, so testing how dark it is, and then I can go around and fill in this ornamental flower thing. I'm not very handy with flowers, cooking, cars, but it gets the job done. And clean off the end. I might try to pick up some of this. Now, because this is just regular weight vanilla Whisper White cardstock, I don't want to play with the blends and the color, the blender pen and the color too much because it can pill, and I think this is a pretty good for on-camera coloring job. So I'm happy now. I'm going to bring in that base done, and that was the can I'm going to use. Okay, so because this is glued, this is on dimensional, I need to have some dimension behind this one. So I'm going to use my paper chips, and I want to get just about the full length of the top. And I like to use the outside, so the clean edge at the top will give a clean edge to somebody if they try to figure out how the card was made. And then just snail the rest of it, because that's going to go on the layer that had dimension. Here's the tricky bit, my jug. Before you put this one on, you need to kind of know where the jug is going to go, because if you do this too low, then the jug won't fit. If you do it too high, it'll come off the edge. So I'm just going to kind of play with them both. Stick my thumbnails, peel off the backing. And on my original one, I put the dimensional right up at the top here, and it kind of interferes with the, when you're viewing the flowers. Just keep that in mind. Peel off the backing of this one. Okay, where are you guys? There you are. Okay. So I think what I did is I tried to split the difference between the copper tile and the top of the card. This layer of copper tile isn't the same layer as that. So I'm going to go about here, not pushing it down, but it's not in the middle. Don't push it down. And then holding this one, that will be just fine. Now I can adhere this layer to the buffalo check that is on dimensional, and adhere the dimensional to the ceiling tile. Now, centering up my flowers with the jug. Don't push it down until you're happy. Good. Alright, so that's Country Home with copper tiles and a buffalo check. If I was doing a home renovation, I think I would hit all of the rustic markers. So this is Early Espresso, Pool Party, Early Espresso, Buffalo Check, Old Olive, Smoky Slate, Cobbler, and Pumpkin Pie in these colors. So to get on track, I'm going to try to blog about this tomorrow. I have plans for tonight, so I can't do it tonight. And I will have my inspirational post later today on Instagram and Facebook. If you could follow me there, that would be awesome. I am at Just Saying with Cards on both Facebook and Instagram.